Welcome to episode 267, Sobriety, Adversity, and Lessons Learned from the Service Industry with Lance Essihos. Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. Today in the house, I have Lance Essihos, who I had the pleasure of meeting just recently through a mutual friend, one you probably have heard on the podcast, Jake Hoffman. Shout out to you, Jake. And since connecting with Lance, I've felt nothing but good vibes. Heart-centered man, very calm, grounded, done a lot of inner work, you can tell just by talking to him within 15 to 20 minutes. And the more I've gotten to learn about what Lance does, his podcast, his mission, the more excited I get talking to him. And so I thought bringing him on the podcast would be another great opportunity, one, to capture what we're about to discuss, but also to let you guys listen in on these conversations and learn and take away whatever aligns and feels right for you. So let me give you a little bio on Lance. Lance is a best-selling author and captivating host of an influential podcast called University of Adversity. He has a purpose, a strong passion to empower others to embrace challenges, discover their true purpose, and reach new heights. He is the visionary founder of Mic'd Up Media, which ignites opportunities for aspiring leaders to connect them with powerful podcast platforms. Most importantly, he is a forever student, a curious individual who will stop at nothing to learn as much as he can so that he can share it with as many people as possible. So Lance, without further ado, thank you for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, brother. Great intro.
Thanks.
I love hearing the live intros on the call. It's amazing. I remember
Dude,
when
man.
I first started, I was doing that and I stopped doing it, and that made me feel like I want to start doing them live again.
You should.
Get built up, right? You get pumped up.
Yeah, it sets
Thanks
the context too. It creates an energetic box that then a conversation can flow from, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I like it. So, everyone has their thing, and I feel like this is for me what aligns. But yeah, I'm excited that you're here, man. I know part of the process here when you're a guest is going over some rapid fire questions. So I have some for you.
All right, let's do it. Hopefully this coffee's gonna kick in and give my brain some spikes here. Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. Where were you born and raised?
Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Beautiful. What's a philosophy that you live by?
Be the change you wish to see in the world. Gandhi.
What is a recent book that you have read that offered immense value for you?
Naval Ramakan, I think that's how you say his name. It's called the Almanac. It's basically pieces together of all his different tweets and all his different advice over the last, I don't know how many years. Naval Ravikant. How do you say his last name? Ravikant?
I think it's Ravikant.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the rapid fire answer for you. It's called the Almanac. Highly recommend it.
Beautiful. What's a piece of advice that has served you well?
Be a kind human, no matter what, in all areas, even if you don't want to be sometimes.
Last one. What does the world need more of right now?
Love, man. There needs to be a lot more hugs, a lot more kindness to each other, and love to self and love to others.
Isn't it interesting on touch, like how disconnected we've become from that? I mean, COVID probably just took that up to unprecedented levels, but there was a study done out of Berkeley with professional athletes, basketball players, and they studied all the teams, and with one focus in mind is how much did the players touch? high fives, fist bumps, chest bumps, whatever. And it turns out that the teams that touched the most had higher winning percentages.
That makes sense, man. I feel like who doesn't feel better after a hug or somebody pat them on the back, like good job, some
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement,
Mm-hmm.
just being acknowledged for doing what you do. And then, through touch. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, yeah, especially with now with everything that's going on in the world, it's almost like, oh, getting touched. What? Like, oh,
Right.
we're
Did you wash your
humans,
hands?
man. We're humans. Like, come on. Yeah. It's definitely an issue for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that I think when we talked originally that we kind of connected on was both being in the food and beverage industry, right? The service industry. And I know in your bio, or in kind of your message and your story, you've traveled the world as a bartender
Mhm.
and just being in that space. And I believe last time we touched on it, and I kind of want to bring it back as like a first thing to talk about. When
Yeah.
in that space, right, you see people both come in maybe sober and then leave in a completely different state of mind, or come partially in a different state of mind and go to a completely different space. And you learn to read body language or watch people, or these are loud environments, and you're seeing kind of these deeper aspects of people emerge or come out. And if you're in it for a long time, you just begin to anticipate kind of what's going to happen based on what you're seeing and how people are reacting, and the mental note of who's ordered what and how many drinks have they had. Do I have to be mindful of where this person's going to go, what they're going to do? Like, walk me through some of your biggest takeaways from, one, seeing the world, but two, doing it in that industry.
Oh man. So glad you brought this up. I don't get to talk about this stuff enough, and
Mm-hmm.
it's working in that industry. I was actually just thinking about this yesterday. It's shaped who I am so much, and it's literally taught me every single aspect. Like I had to, as you know, right? You have to learn so much, and you have to multitask, and you have to do all these things. And one of the things is, serving people under extreme pressure. You're dealing with personalities of the staff you're working with, so you're like trying to like keep the flow of energy up, but still like dealing with these people with these needs and these egos. And it's like reading this, it's like this weird dance that you have to balance. And I this is what really, when I first started the podcast, this is kind of what I realized, was that I love that aspect of somebody coming in and them kind of looking at you one way, and they sort of, you could just feel this energy. They're like, oh, this guy, oh, what do they know? And then I loved like cracking them, and
Mm-hmm.
then you could just feel like, oh, like you see that, you feel the energy change, and then they all of a sudden see you differently, and there's like this connection, and then you can have these like deep conversations. And I noticed that with podcasting as well. It's like I had people coming in, and I'd be like, oh, this is kind of awkward. And as soon as you connect with them on a level, you build a little rapport or some sort of similar thing that you interest you have, and then boom, they're like, oh, you're just like me. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, now we can jam. And I always love that about working in the industry, because I generally I love human connection. I love having these conversations. And I got to learn a lot about that. I got to learn a lot about how like certain people, discernment of, okay, they're not ready to have a conversation. But
Mm-hmm.
then, you learn how to pull back a little bit, you learn how to push a little bit. And yeah, it was really interesting to navigate that world and just get to learn about human behavior. And it was also sad to watch people, come in and they're just so lonely, especially if they're traveling around the world by themselves, and they they're seeking connection. And a lot of times the bartender is that connection, right? And
Yeah.
I'm speaking more towards like, these I used to work in some of these like nice cocktail bars in these hotels, right? So which would turn into like nightclubs and whatever. But like these very high profile people would come in and they'd sit at the bar, and I always wonder like, why are you here? Like, isn't there other stuff you could be doing? But it's I feel like there's just this, they feel some sort of lost, and they need connection. And I used to love building that relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And my philosophy always to my team was like, always, you know the make the person feel better than they did before. That's your job. Like, they come in and just help them leave feeling better than they did before. And that's just generally what I try to do with people, right? And working in that industry, I just learned so much about giving people an experience, and that's what lit me up. Like, I love seeing somebody like enjoy themselves,
Yeah.
whether it's
It's a,
yeah, whether it's like a
yeah.
recommendation of a good whiskey, or it's a food, or it's just like, oh, you got to go here, you got to go check this place out. And it's like they get excited because you care, because there's so many people that don't give a shit about people. And I think in that industry, I learned to really give a shit about people, and people really appreciate that,
They
right?
do.
It's
Yeah.
You could probably speak to that too, right? There's just so many people that don't give a shit about people, and they're just there. And then when somebody actually cares and shows an interest, it's like, oh wow, I feel seen.
Yeah.
And that's the industry that I kind of started to understand that,
Yeah.
so in
Yeah. So
personal
many
development, it sort of makes more sense now, right?
totally, totally. And you're making me think about certain things that I've learned. So I was in the clubs, right? So day
Yeah.
club. It's during the day. There's 3,000 people. It's hot. It's in Vegas. It's loud, right? Like it's just a weird dynamic.
Yeah.
Fun and cool, but just harsh and a lot. And to the point of like people want to connect, and it's amazing when you ask the right question and all of a sudden you just watch them unlock, and now sometimes they can't stop talking because they're like, you
Yeah.
finally get me. But it is a beautiful thing to see. It's a whole energetic physiological shift in how they operate and communicate to you. And it's like a whole another person just emerged from this body, and now we're having a completely different conversation. And that was really cool because you learn how to match the energy that people have coming into the space, right? So like you're like a shapeshifter in a lot of ways. If someone's coming in,
Yes.
yeah, and is like super direct and just maybe soft spoken and doesn't say a lot, then maybe you start like that. And it's like, hey man, what's up? Cool. Good. What are you drinking? And it's like short, quick bursts, right? And then as they recognize a similar mode of communicating, you start elongating what you're saying. Maybe it's like, so what brings you in today? Right. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I just had this conference, and now it's getting a little bit longer. And then as the longer it gets, the more you know about them, the more they feel like comfortable because they're talking about themselves. And then it like turns into this full blown deep conversation that no one would have thought of to find in a space like this.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. It really is. And the way you're describing that, yeah, like you start to read body language, and you start to you can't teach. Like, you can't teach that stuff. I feel like it's like you just got to experience it, right? You got to just. And I think sometimes I took it for granted at understanding what was happening. And I think somebody even like yourself, like when you know how to connect with somebody, you almost take it for granted. Like, you almost feel like, well, doesn't everybody know how to do this?
Yeah.
Like, but they don't. And that industry, it was like it forces you to do that. And I remember when I was serving tables back in the day, man, that was the hardest, because when you go to somebody's space and you're standing up, hey, how's it going? They're like, what are you doing here? Like, I
Yeah.
don't, what, can I get you a drink? What do but then when they come to your bar, it's like, oh, you're coming to my place now. It's
Yeah.
like a different
Yeah.
energy. Like, oh, you're the bartender. So it's like all those
Hmm.
kind of things, man. The skills that I learned there are so transferable to life now, and just like persuasion and just like connecting and just
Yeah.
being a kind human. Like, hey,
Yeah.
like, and taking interest. And I never thought that was happening while that was happening in that industry, Like, I
Yeah.
had no idea, but it's so valuable
Right.
that, man, I would I would recommend anybody when they're young to get in there and just, do all the things, work your way up.
Hmm.
You're going to be so much more valuable when it comes to like other jobs, if you get in sales, if you get in anything really. And
True.
yeah,
There's two jobs that I always suggest is door-to-door sales or
yeah.
service industry. You're right.
And if
Because
you
it's
could do
it's
both,
reps.
if you could do
Yeah,
both, holy man, yeah.
dude, right?
Yeah.
Like selling and connecting and selling, like that, those are the skills for life right there. But yeah, it's you're a morale controller when you're at the
Yeah.
bar, right? Like I control in a way and influence how good of a time people are having, not just by alcohol, right? But by conversation, by
Mm,
connection, by making sure the vibe is right at the bar so that everyone leaves one in a good place, but also like remembering a positive experience, right? And that might
yeah.
mean that you talk to certain people less. It might be that you talk to other people more, but I almost look at you as like reading energy levels and learning what to dial up and what to dial down. And I think anyone listening to this can have that level of influence in whatever craft they choose if they learn to see it that way. Like anyone that does something and someone's coming to you, they're coming into your space. What do you want that person to feel when they're in your space? Because if you are aware of that, then they attach higher elevated emotions to you. So every time they say see you, you're almost anchoring them to a form of positivity.
Oh, dude, that is so true, man. I've never had anybody, I've never had a conversation like this with somebody that's been in the industry that actually understands that concept. Like, the way you're saying that is exactly the way I've thought about it. And I haven't been able to really articulate what is actually happening. And it's so true because I remember I have the ability to be able to lift a room up or deflate the room. Like, if I went in with bad energy, dude,
Oh
I
yeah.
could bring the whole house. I could bring everybody's energy down. And I watched it and I was like, rolling hungover, complaining. I'm like, man. And then the vibe, and I was like, that's my fault.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realized, I'm like, I can change this energy of the team, of everything. And I watched it. And now that I talk about, energy and, get into the spirituality and all this, I understand what was happening. Before I was kind of like, what's
Yes.
happening here? But certain people have that ability. And I think people don't realize that. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of your energy going into a room like that, especially
Mm.
if you have a team and you have people, because like you're radiating that energy and it's your responsibility, and you can literally make or break a person's experience by how you show up. And you're right, you anchor. That's why people are like, oh, I love going there, I love that
Mm-hmm.
bar, or that bar manager is the best. It's not because they're just giving everybody free shots, that helps, but
Right.
it's because they feel good about themselves when they're there.
That's
they
right.
and then they just anchor that to a great experience. And then you go to another bar and you walk in and you're like, oh man, the vibe sucks here, because you got
Mm-hmm.
some grumpy guy in the back. Like, you can just tell, you're like, man, that's no fun. Nobody wants that. They're trying to escape that. So it's so true, that anchoring. And they have that when you go there, that experience that they feel from you, they anchor that to that whole room and just the feel of it. So it's really interesting, that
Yeah.
concept, man.
Conditioning, man. And for
Yeah.
you, like you were a hockey player, right? And so Like you do that. I'm sure you did that with your team and how you showed up to practice and what you did outside of practice, right? Like all that stuff matters. And you're
Yeah.
doing a similar thing with your podcast and the questions that you ask and the things that you mirror back. It's all a vibe control, like
Yeah.
and there's a certain frequency that you like to operate at. Same with me. It's like I only want one mode, and that's deep. So how
Mhm.
can we connect so that we can go deep? And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a little longer, but as you have those reps, you just get better at sifting through who someone is quickly through body language, tonality, word selection, all of that. And then boom, you ask the one question that opens up the floodgates. And now you're in a completely different space that one, maybe the person has never been in, or two,
Mhm.
what both of you need at that time of your life to have a very powerful collaborative experience. And that's
Yeah.
what I love creating. That's where all the breakthroughs happen.
That's yeah, man. That energy that you bring, it, I mean, in sports, yeah. I mean, it's everything. The leadership aspect, the responsibility. I didn't realize it when I was playing sports, man. I got to a pretty high level, but I didn't realize how important and how responsible you have to be if you're in a leadership role. It's not about you. It's about how are you showing up for the team, and how is your energy so that the people that you are leading can feel into and look up to you for,
That's
and
right.
it's and even in, man, like entrepreneurship, it's the same things, and these are things that I've struggled with over the years. With this is why I do continue to do the work, is that the anger and the frustration and the sadness sometimes that comes with this entrepreneurial journey, with like the highs and the lows, man, you got to be centered. You got to be solid. Like, you'll be up 1 minute and down 1 minute, but it's like you can't get emotional about it. You got to just be grounded. And there's times in the past where I had different people working for me, and that like old programming of like losing my shit, I'd like get angry, and then it would like mess up the energy, and then the communication would be off, and after that it would never be the same. So I've learned, it's like you really have to, that's why you have to know like what gets your energy to the level that to your frequency, to the level that you want to be at. Like, we know what when we feel great, and we know when we feel like shit. So it's like, what brings me here and what takes me out. And I think that has kind of been the dance over the years, is figuring that out, because back in the day it was like, oh, I don't know, one day I feel good, the next day I feel bad, I don't know. But then you start to pay attention to the things, the daily things that suck your energy or fill your energy.
Yeah.
And I think that has been a big thing too over the years, is learning that, realizing that you can create great energy daily. Like, you're not going to feel like amazing every day, but there's ways that
Yeah. You could have a standard.
you can really get to. You can choose. I understand I got to feel this right now, but right now is not the time. I got to get my energy to the level where I'm leading people. Like, this is where these are the things that I can do, and this is what I
Yeah.
need to do. And I think like that awareness is so important,
Yeah.
right?
And I think in order for that to remain sustainable, one needs to be tapped into a purpose that's rooted in some form of service. Because
Right.
if it's always about you, you're only going to do just enough to take care of yourself, right? And
Right.
there's a level of importance to that, but when we're talking about impact and reaching new levels and learning new things every day and mastery of anything, right? I have found, I mean, there's ways to get there outside of service, but the way that I found to be the most fulfilling and sustainable and enjoyable is through service. Like,
Mm.
yeah, I'm feeling pain right now and I'm hurting, and I will deal with that. And I've also committed to this level of responsibility to take care of X, Y, and Z, to my employees that trusted me with their livelihood, the family that I've created that looks up to me to be the leader of the household, and how I respond is how they're going to respond. Like there needs to be something bigger than you to tap
Mm.
into something deeper that you can't do just by you yourself, right? It opens up space. And Tony Robbins said the quote one time, this was like 5-6 years ago that I heard it, and he said, life flows to more life.
Mm.
And so like what I heard from that was like, the bigger your mission, the more your mission is about things outside of you, the more
Mm.
people you're doing something for, the more life force is going to flow through you. And with that life force comes wisdom, downloads, skills, tools, opportunities, people, heartbreak, but
Yeah.
also transformative, high empowering feelings as well. So um got to live a full spectrum life, man, if you're really trying to squeeze as much as you can out of this experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have you been to Tony Robbins Unleash Your Power Within?
I have.
Freaking wild, man.
Talk about energetic standard.
Well, that that was that was such a demonstration. Like I understand. After that, I understood what he means. Right? Like you got to, in order to absorb things, even to learn, you got to be at that high energy, right? And yeah, I love that. It's the bigger your purpose, the more life force that can flow. It's like you're opening up your
Capacity.
awareness. Yeah, your capacity to receive and give more. So when you're willing to give more, you're willing to receive more. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so that it's been really cool, just learning that and stepping more into that. And I know, part of your story is facing adversity in your life with some of the, most challenging things that life has to offer. Experiencing death of loved ones to, battling, drugs and alcohol, if you as you've mentioned before. What what change, like, walk us through those times, right? Because it's very natural for anyone to avoid, to numb, to withdraw, to uh, not take situations like that and use them to empower, to grow, to refine, to go deeper, right? And at some point, I imagine you something clicked, or you got to a certain place mentally, emotionally, spiritually, where you looked at that situation in a different way, and maybe that help transcend the experience, but maybe step into a version of you that you didn't even know was there. Can you walk us through any or all of those situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I always had an inner knowing that there was something more than what I was doing. And now I understand that was intuition, my connection to God, my higher self. But back then, during those times, I was just figuring out what my purpose was in the world. Like I knew I wanted to do something that would make impact on people's lives, so I was trying different things to figure that out. And after hockey ended, I tried a whole bunch of different things, every job you could imagine. And then the bar industry gave me this sense of fulfillment because it was connecting with people, right?
Mm.
But there's the dark side of that where I partied a lot, I drank a lot, I did a lot of things. And living in Australia, it was kind of 10x, 100x sometimes. Um, and I kind of just numbed that feeling that you get, you know, that whisper. And I'd like, shut up, I know, I'll deal with that later, and just the booze will allow me to kind of quiet that down because I knew I could be doing better. And the booze just allowed me to like not only kind of create this new persona and help me feel more confident and not feel so much judgment. And there was all of these different things that happened when I drank. I became this like superhero person. Like I didn't have the anxiety. I had more confidence. I mean, that's why people drink, right? I didn't realize, you know, I was suffering with this stuff. But when I drank, I was like, it all went away. And I was like, oh. And then so did the feelings of like you could do better, you should be doing more, you should be doing something else. So I just escaped. And there's a lot in my youth and teen years that I was numbing from and running away from. And I think that when things really changed for me was when, so in 2016, we lost my younger 18-year-old brother to suicide. And the start of 2016, you know, I talked about this in my book. It was a tough thing to write about because it's kind of out there and everything. But, my dad was staying with me for the first time. I was seeing him for the first time in 3 years in Australia. And I was at work that day and we got the news and I had to come home and tell him. And it was just an absolute nightmare. So that experience kind of led to a huge downfall in 2016. I was just an absolute nightmare. I don't know how I had kept a job. I guess it's because I was good with the regulars. I was good with I was just good at what I did. So they couldn't really fire me, but I was just a nightmare. And I fell into this like real dark hole. And when things really started to change was when I decided in the beginning of 2017 to give up booze. And I started 3 months and then 6 months. And then I decided to go a year. And that year committing to sobriety was like when the lights started to come on again. And the whispers became louder and they were kind of like yells like, hey, this is your opportunity to kind of like, you know, start to building on some foundation versus like digging yourself out of holes all the time. That's what I always felt like. I felt like I was always digging myself out of holes, always getting myself into trouble. And when I was sober, there was none of that like up and down. It was like I was almost waiting for myself to fall off again. And then I was like, it didn't. And I was like, oh. And it started to just give me clarity. And then I started to read books. I started to read personal development books. I started to, you know, practice meditation. I started to really train hard. I was living in Australia. I was running on the beach. I was doing all the things, all the buzzwords, all the cold plunges and all the stuff from back then. And I was starting to feel better. I was starting to feel like, oh, I like this stuff. I really started to journal and practice gratitude because I used to think that stuff was kind of corny back then, right? But I started to pay attention to the people that were giving me advice that had the results I wanted. And I was like, okay, well, why don't I just start listening to this stuff? Like, why don't I do it? Instead of, and I guess those daily habits that I started to practice started to sort of build this new person. And I just started to evolve, and that's when things started to change. And then I went back and I ran a bar sober for about 6 months or 6 to 8 months. And then by the end of that year, I was like, I'm not, this isn't aligned anymore. Working this bar just isn't my thing. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not for me anymore. So it was those moments that I gave myself the opportunity to be sober that just allowed me to start replacing the booze with different habits, different commitments. And then all of a sudden I was like, I started to feel better. I still to feel more connected to myself. And as you know, when you start to do the work on yourself, like you start to peel back the layers, you start to realize, oh wow, there's a deeper connection here. Because essentially we're just trying to connect to ourselves. We're out in this world trying to chase everything outwardly when all it is an attempt to come home and to I'm remembering of what's been here the whole time. So that's what I started to realize. It's like I started to feel more whole. And look, it's been a challenge. I've fallen off sobriety a few times since then, just with life. But that year was a huge step for me at figuring out and kind of changing the direction of the path.
Yeah.
And, I ended up losing my dad that year in 2017, halfway through the year. But if I wasn't sober, I don't know how I would have dealt with that. Like, we got shocking news. He had like 48 hours to live. I had to fly from Sydney, Australia back to Canada. And, all of this was in a year and a half, brother and dad. And, but the thing is that I believe that God was helping me prepare for something that was coming. That's how I make sense of, well, why did I go sober that year? Like, what was the reason? Like, yeah, I wanted to change my life, but there was a deeper reason. I feel like there was like a prepping for something that was coming. And that prepping allowed me to deal with death differently than I would have prior. So I learned a lot about myself, and I really realized, like, what it felt like to kind of be a responsible man for the first time, like dealing with death and all the things that come with it. And yeah, that was probably the moment in time that really that shifted things the most for me.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, your father and your brother and no booze in the same year. Like, that's a trifecta of challenge, adversity.
Yeah,
And I now I understand why adversity is so critical in your story, is because it's like you were faced with, and your access to alcohol, right? Also was an even greater feat. It's like, this is my livelihood at the moment, and also something that I'm actively trying not to partake in.
yeah,
So you're like battling your own personal journey there, while also like in the space where everyone's there to do that thing, right? So yeah,
yeah.
that's hard, man.
that that's what made it so challenging, is that it was to go sober for a year was like the ultimate thing, to be able to, write a cocktail list. I wrote a cocktail list for the Four Seasons in Sydney and try it all, and I had to spit everything out. It may not sound like much to people that haven't struggled with that, but man, when you gotta create a thing from the thing you're trying to, create a list of things for people, but you can't partake in the things. It's like the ultimate test. And that sort of gave me an understanding that my own capabilities, like what I'm capable of.
Absolutely.
And um, it was an interesting time, man. It was an interesting time to learn and grow. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you for your sharing that, your strength. And for anyone listening who is going through anything similar or any form of adversity that they deem as adversity, I think it'd be helpful for if you could, in your own mind, how do you define adversity, right? And what are like 2 to 3 things you think an individual needs to either develop, equip themselves with, or reinforce to move through that adversity as effective as possible. There's going to be bumps regardless. I mean, life is just that way, and it naturally, but how can we give ourselves the best chance?
yeah. And there's been times where I wondered to myself, like, why do I speak about this stuff? Like, why do I always want to talk about adversity? But the more that I learn about this human experience, the more I realize that how you how one deals with adversity is literally how their life unfolds. You know, it's like we're all gonna have difficult shit. We're all gonna have struggle. We're all gonna have loss. But how do you show up with that? How do you move forward? And I've realized that being able to, alchemize that and learn it, get to know it, understand it, and transform that into purpose is really what life is about, because we're given these opportunities to learn and grow through adversity, through challenge. If we didn't go through this stuff, we wouldn't learn anything. Nothing would feel fulfilling. Nothing would be an accomplishment if everything was perfect all the time. Yes, we want to feel great and we want to get to that place of like inner peace. But I believe the inner peace comes from looking at the things that are challenging you and be able to not run away. Look it in the eye, love it. Parts of it wants to be seen and heard, and then it doesn't have the power over you. So for me, first thing is like awareness. You got to be aware of it. There's this thing, I have the 5 A's in my book that I'll talk about just for mastering adversity. It's like, because I wanted to think about a framework for why, like what actually happens with adversity. So for me, being aware is the first thing. Like understanding, like, okay, here we go. Here's the thing. Like I'm aware, I understand. A lot of people aren't. They're just not aware. And awareness is the first step to healing or doing anything, in my opinion, right? And the second is like acceptance of the thing. Just like, okay, so here we go. This is the way it is. There's no running away. I have to accept this. It doesn't mean quit or not do anything. It's just understanding like, it is what it is. And that's hard for a lot of people. A lot of people, they think that accepting is like quitting or giving up, but it's not. It's just accepting truth, right? And then I have the next is aspire, which is like, well, what's on the other side of this? Like, what is this teaching me? What is this desire that I want to have to overcome this thing? Right? Like, I want to, most times this thing has something on the other side of it. So if you have that goal, you take aspire, you aspire to be that, then this is just part of that process. And then in order to be able to move through this effectively, you got to get in alignment, right? You got to be doing the things that align with what it's going to take to move through this thing, right? Like if you say you want to you want to overcome this thing, you want to transform this thing, you want to move through it, but your actions don't align with what's going to take, then it's not going to happen, right? And then the final thing is alchemize. I wanted this. I love the word alchemize for mastering adversity, for moving through it, because that's really what's happening, in my opinion. It's not trying to like move it away. It's like, all right, let's grab this, let's learn it, let's like figure it out, feel it, and let's transform this thing into gold, into something that I can use in my life to create purpose, right? Because that's why the thing is challenging. That's why you call it adversity, because it's challenging you. What's hard for somebody else isn't hard for somebody else, right? What's hard for you is different for somebody else. But the reason it's considered adversity is because it's forcing you to step up and look at it. And if you can turn that thing and you can transform that can become your purpose. And that's why I get so inspired by interviewing people that have done that. They've been able to take a hard situation and they've been able to turn it into this thing that now serves as their purpose, that they can help other people with. And that's why I believe, like, for whatever reason, I had to learn those lessons and go through this stuff. And I continue to go through it so that I can be of service to people. Because if I want to make impact in people's lives, I have to be able to relate to them. And the more I can experience, the more adversity that I've been through and I've alchemized, the more that I can say, yeah, I hear you. I got you. I can relate to that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel is what happens. And I think that a lot of people kind of just want to run away from it instead of just like, no, let's sit in the fire. Eventually
Yeah.
that pain will turn to love. That has no other way, you know, that fire, that hardship, eventually, if you give it the space and you feel it, it will turn into love, and it will fuel, and it will become something that you can use for purpose. And that's my belief.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
two
yeah,
two things come up for
yeah.
me when you say that. One, if you look up the word adversity, the Latin roots of that is, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but it's like adventare, which means to turn towards,
Mm,
right? So adversity translated turn towards the thing, right? Rather than running away, turn towards. So that's like, that was point one. I thought that was really cool. And then two is in alchemy, one of my brothers, Brandon Collinsworth, a shout out to you, talks about the Negredo in alchemy. The Negredo is like the blackness that everything in order to be alchemized needs to be grinded down and put into this dark, black, deep, pressure filled space in order to basically strip it of whatever it was before to transform it into something it's never been. But it's like the dark night of the soul, right? In order to do that, you have to first let go, release, become quote unquote nothing to then become something. And so if you put those two things together, it's like turn towards the thing you fear, knowing that when you do, you're releasing what no longer serves and welcoming what will help you get through the thing that you're fearing. Right. And it's just a really cool narrative that was forming in my head when you were talking.
yeah, that's so true, man, because that fear, and I had an interesting experience when I was doing ayahuasca with fear. It was on my fourth night, and I remember I learned about fear, and it was like this. It was telling me that the reason it feels that feeling of fear is an invitation. Like it's like, come here because I have a gift for you. Like that was kind of like the obviously you
Sure.
want to be smart in life, but that was this thing, this experience that I had was that yes, you feel like avoiding it, but once you lean into that, the gifts that you get in life, the fulfillment of life, the gold that you get in life is on the other side of that. So it's like if you can lean into that uncomfortable invitation, if you can see it as an invitation and you can go in, you are going to get something from that. So it was almost like if you want the gifts of life, you gotta if you want the gifts that life have to offer, you want to feel great, then lean into that feeling that is kind of trying to push you away. And if you can
Yes.
get good at reading that and going, oh, that really scares me. I know what's on the other side of that. Let's just lean into that. And how many times when you face a fear do you regret it? Like it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I shouldn't have done that. I mean, obviously you can't be stupid, right? I'm not talking like being like stupid with like doing risky things. I mean, of course there's consequences with that, but like, the little fears that we have in our lives that we steer away from, that
Yeah.
really it's silly, that
Saying
if
I
we just
love you first, asking for a raise at work, being
yeah,
honest with a friend.
yeah, yeah, just leaning into those as many times as possible. And I
Mhm.
mean, I'm not perfect at it, but I have learned from the evidence in my life that when I decide to do it, I'm like, oh, that was so good. Why wouldn't I do that? And I honestly think that's kind of like the feeling that those feelings in life we got to pay attention to. And I think if you're constantly numbing yourself with booze, you're constantly doing things that take away your connection to yourself, to that connection to a higher power, like you're numbing out the senses so you don't really get to feel like what's true.
Yes.
And you want to feel those things. You want to feel ooh, this makes me uncomfortable. Okay,
Yeah.
why? Like, let's figure out what that is and then lean into it. So
Yeah. It's almost like
yeah,
facing your fears, like the way we're talking about it, is like the equivalent of your body going to the gym,
yeah,
right? And lifting the weights and doing like till failure reps. It's like no one ever regrets going to the gym because you feel the rush of endorphins that come over your body when you put it through stress.
right.
Same thing mentally, right? It's like you're building your brain muscle, if you want to look at that way, when you face the fear, so much so that you do find that peace, knowing that whatever happens, I trust myself to be resourceful enough to figure it out. And light
Mm.
embedded in life is uncertainty. So we can't predict anything. There's nothing that we can control outside of what we think, what we feel, and what we do. So when we place ourselves intentionally in those uncertain, fearful moments and develop a framework from that uncertainty, we get better at alchemizing unknowns into knowns.
Yeah, yeah, and it always works out. Like everything always works out. There's this we're conditioned to think that it's always the worst case scenario. Maybe it was because of our survival and our ancestors or whatever, but man, everything always works out. Like if you I I've learned this over and over again from having a very generally pessimistic kind of upbringing, like kind of like, scarcity mindset. And I've had to deprogram that and unlearn that. And as the more I do it, even if I get in a situation that feels uncomfortable, it always works out if I trust. And when it doesn't is the resistance and I get in the way of myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
all you can do is do your best in the moment and surrender the rest. But a lot of times I used to do this all the time too. I'd get in my head so much and literally get in my own way. And it's like things always work out. Always. like it doesn't it always works out. And the things that we worry about, you look back and you're like, why was I even worried about that? And that that's such a lesson that I've had to learn, is that even if even if I don't know the answer, it's all going to work out. And that mindset itself is that if even the only reason it feels like it's not working out, or the only reason it feels like a quote unquote failure, is because of my expectation of what I thought it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think it's supposed to go this way and it didn't. So, oh, I must have failed. Well, no, how do I know that it's exactly what it was supposed to be? And just trust and just stop getting stressed about it. That's that's been such a lesson too, man. It's like
Yeah.
we don't know the big we don't know the big game, the big plan here. We don't know. But this idea that we create, and I created for myself so much, is the suffering in a situation that didn't go as I planned. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I must not be doing it right. It's like, well, no, just trust it's going to work out long term. And it always
Yeah.
does. It was my point of that. And
There's a
yeah,
saying that says no one breaks your heart, they just break your expectations.
it's so true,
Right?
right?
Yeah. And so like what you're talking about, the belief of that it'll always work out. Whether that's true or false is irrelevant in my opinion,
Mm,
because you believing it calms your overthinking enough to surrender to the moment. And because you're more present in the moment, you get access to information you wouldn't normally get access to because you're trying to force something into what you think it should be.
yeah.
Right. And when you
Mm,
do that, you speed up time, you compound time because you're taking the moment and superimposing it with future and past moments. And so the moment becomes heavier and it requires more energy to hold. And then more narratives stem from that, which produces a form of anxiety. And so when you can remove that through a belief or a thought or a mental story that you're telling yourself in those moments, it allows you to live more in this moment, grab more of it, squeeze more out of it, experience more of it, which then allows you to extract more wisdom, which makes you better at making decisions in the future. And it elongates now.
Mm.
So time distorts in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And when you're not in your head and you're in the moment, that's where you truly can create magic. And if life, I believe, if life is art, right? Our lives are a form of expression. There's no right or wrong to that. It's just whatever you want it to be. And there's something very freeing in it, in that there's no way it's supposed to go aside from where you think, where you want it to go, and then the surrender of expressing that. But then who we think will judge our art, aka our life, and that's what we have to navigate, right? And that's where the fear comes in. It's like all this ego self-preservation thought process that's rooted in a lack of self-acceptance and self-love, that when we can work through, life becomes this beautiful expression of you being true to you in every, or at as many moments as possible.
Mm. I love how you said that life is art, because it really is. And what we create is like that connection to God or intuition coming into form. It's like that's the expression in life itself. Like that inner energy that flows through us, that comes out in our creations. That art is God. It is that power that we receive, and that is life. And all the creations in life it's art. It really is. And you get to decide what that looks like. And it's so interesting that we base the art on what other people think. Like you said, like, why do we care? Why do we choose certain people's philosophies to live life by and care what they say? Why do we, like, I won't do something because, or post something because I'm worried about some person might think. And I don't really give a shit about that person either. And it's so crazy to not do something or want to create something because somebody tells you that there's too many of that, or that somebody's opinion. It's like not watching a movie because someone told you not to watch it. It's like, don't go to that restaurant because one person said they didn't want to go there. Well, no, how do you know? It's like, don't travel there because I watched something on YouTube. It's like, well, no, you have to experience this stuff yourself.
You
But
do.
it's like these, like, take these opinions of people and like shapes who we are and what we want to create based off that. It's wild to think about, and how that influences us in our creations of the art
Right.
of life.
And and on the flip side, like I don't think that thinking about other people's opinions is all bad. I think it does serve us in some ways, where
Yeah.
it opens up the door to necessary feedback that we may not have been able to see, that we trust someone enough to listen to, right? And so I care enough about my wife's opinion of the work that I do, enough to listen, so that my
Yeah.
listening breeds new forms of creativity, right? So it's not that it's all bad, but what you're talking about is a very common thing that I and just about everyone does at times, or very consistently, where we give too much
Yeah.
value to someone maybe we don't even know, or to the idea of who we think someone is that isn't even
Yeah.
real. And so we're using this mental construct to guide our lives, getting us to do things that we know we shouldn't do because it doesn't feel right. But it's the fear of what this imaginary thing is going to do or say, that if we can highlight, if we become aware, to use one of your A's, if we become aware that that's actually what's happening, and you say, I'm not afraid that so and so is going to have this opinion of me. I'm actually afraid that my mom will say this and this about what I do. Now that I have highlighted who the actual voice is coming from and what the source is, then I can realize how silly that is. Like, my mom's still going to love me regardless. So why don't I just do it? And so, but since it's like people like to hide in the vague, because in the specificity, they have to take ownership and responsibility for where they're not taking control of their mind. And it's easier just to say everyone hates me as opposed to this person and that person hate me. It's like it's a laziness of the mind, but it's a laziness that's rooted in survival. And so it isn't until we take ownership and responsibility for how we come equipped as human beings, which is usually based on survival, and say, I'm done surviving. It's time for me to start thriving or experience some form of greatness, whatever I define that as, and start programming my mind to be intentional, to not let it drift to places that don't serve me, to not let it create stories that I have no way of proving are right or wrong, but to operate off of what I feel is my truest expression, so that I become the artist that I innately am. That the only way I'll find out if I am is to actually do. And then you actually do the thing, and then you're like, damn, that was pretty cool. And then you just do more of those things, and you have a completely different life 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later.
You brought up a great point about having, you almost like you need a counsel that you can trust, and having your wife or having close friends that you value their opinion,
Yeah.
because they're going to tell you straight up. And that's so important, man. I think that's gone back in time too, like having that tribe or just a few people that you trust, and having that. Yeah, I agree 100% that there, you got to have that. You got to have that honest people. Like and it's like, I don't like to say I don't give a shit what anybody thinks, because that's not true. When people say that, I don't think it's actually true. It's like what they value. I don't, I try not to like take their values and make it my own kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but there's certain people that I believe that we need to have, that we can trust, that will tell us straight or encourage us, because they're saying it for the right reasons.
That's right.
Right. And I think that's why it's a blessing to have an amazing wife. I don't have one yet, but I love to one day to have that. Well, even kids too. Kids are so
Oh,
honest.
bro, so honest.
You're like,
Daddy,
oh,
what's this fat on your stomach? You're like, oh, thanks, dude.
oh,
Like
just
just
like
little
the
things. I don't know.
so honest and so smart,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So, great conversation. This was amazing. Thank you for your insights and, just all the things that you've learned and getting through the adversity that you face. And by no means does that mean the challenges are done. They'll just be more in different forms. But what you've been able to create with your book, your podcast, and the message that you represent and do your best to uphold every day is, I think, a necessary message that myself and all of us that listen to this can use at some level. So thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise. And is there anything else you want to leave the audience with, and maybe also tell us where they can find you?
Yeah. Dude, thank you so much. This was great. I love talking about things that I don't get to talk about very much. And, it's fun to kind of go back and revisit these things, because I look at it with a fresh set of eyes and fresh everything now. So thank you. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome conversation. Yeah, I would just say to people, like, um yeah, I just like, I embrace choose the challenge, choose the most choose the difficult thing first, otherwise the difficult thing will choose you later. And
I like
that's
that.
what I really choose: the cold plunge, choose the work, do the things that you don't want to do now, so that your future self will be happy. Make your bed when you don't want to do it. Those little wins help. Those little things help you, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. That's how you can create. I believe in my life of creative flow state is by choosing the thing, doing the thing, and then allow things to unfold rather than it show up unexpectedly. So that's what I would say. And yeah, I would just direct people to my Instagram. It's all there. And they want to listen to the podcast, which you're going to be on soon as well, and the book and all that stuff. I'd love to have any of your listeners come over and you know, listen to the content and, you know, wherever that leads us. There's lots of great people, lots of conversations on University of Adversity. I think I've been doing it probably about as long as you have now.
Yeah, I think we're doing like 5-6 episodes of each other.
Yeah, so we're kind of dinosaurs to the space, which is great.
Right. And hey, and no signs of slowing down, man. This is get to talk people like you. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again, man. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, Lance. Have a good one, man. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.